now. And I'm just going to check to make sure that we are indeed live streaming.
Tamara will be going back and forth. She is just checking YouTube now, committee members, because we're streaming from WebEx, but direct to YouTube, which is, according to Tamara, a first. So we're just making sure it's no bugs at the time.
Oh, we've done WebEx direct to YouTube many times. It's using eScribe at the same time. That is
right. Sorry.
Yeah.
Right. This is a first for this subcommittee for sure.
Yes. And we are good. And we are live. And it's still 1:59. We do have quorum. Councillor Danko, you've joined us just now. We are live right now. It is now 2 o'clock, so you can go ahead, Councillor Farr, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Tamara. Welcome to this January 17th West Harbour Development Subcommittee meeting. I will call the meeting officially to order. Be advised, members of public, we webcast live, temporarily archive on our website, and other individuals are always welcome in the media to audibly and or visually record this meeting. 5-minute time limits in effect. Quorum is present minus, I believe, Mayor Fred Eisenberger at this point. I'll take a quick attendance on that. I see the other 4 members, Councillor Wilson, Powers, and Danko. And I believe Mayor Fred Eisenberger will be present soon. So, Madam Clerk, any changes to the agenda?
Apologies, Mr. Chair. No, there are no changes to the agenda. However, the presentation for 8.2, which was not available on Friday, has now been published and is available with the agenda.
All right, thank you. Councillor Powers, welcome to West Harbour Development Subcommittee. I know you bring with it a great deal of understanding of the history, but also a passion as per usual. So we welcome you in place of MP Collins. I should have said that right off the top. So I'll just need you, Councillor Powers, to move this agenda as presented. Seconded by Councillor Danko. All in favor? And that ends up by Councillor Powers, but we can vote in eScribe. And Tamara, I'm wondering if for today's meeting, maybe we just use the emoji. If it makes life easier for you from toggling back and forth, I mean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's fine.
Okay.
We can do it this way.
Okay.
And there's the mayor now. Mr. Mayor, we've just voting on the approval of the agenda. You're in favor. Thank you very much.
Thumbs up. It's unanimous. Any discussion on this agenda as it's presented? Okay. And yeah, the motion already carried. Any declarations of interest? I see none. Okay. Then we're on to approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. That was April of 2021, April 13th. I need a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes of that meeting. Moved by Councillor Wilson and seconded by Mayor Fred Eisenberger. And an electronic eScribe vote or visual.
I have to give you a visual today. Unfortunately, I can't get into eScribe.
Okay,
no problem. So Councillor, sorry, Mr. Mayor is yes, and Councillor Powers also yes. You can give me a verbal.
And that is carried. On to staff presentations. 8.1 is the Discovery Center Strategy Framework. I'd like to call Chris Phillips, our Senior Advisor, West Harbour Redevelopment. He will introduce item 8.1. Andrea Smith, our Senior Development Consultant, is also with us, West Harbour Redevelopment, and we'll give the presentation. So Chris and Andrea, if you want to please turn on your cameras and your microphones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. On today's agenda, we actually have two specific staff presentations that come directly out of the April 21st direction that the subcommittee and then council approved later on. First one will be on the basically the long-term framework of the Discovery Center, and the second presentation will be on a short-term lease offer that we received. I would like to take this opportunity at the very beginning, though, Mr. Chair and members of committee, to introduce you to some new faces around the virtual table. Back just prior to the pandemic, we created an office called the Municipal Land Development Office, of which I'm the manager of the Municipal Land Development Office. And the idea of creating this office was to bring in kind of under one roof, so to speak, people who are engaged and involved in some of these key city building initiatives throughout the city. The idea of it was to look at taking a portfolio of city-owned assets and trying to leverage those assets into a multitude of public policy type elements. So trying to leverage city-owned assets for some other kind of purposes. We as a team work collaboratively across multiple departments and divisions throughout the city, although we're housed under economic development within planning and economic development. The portfolio itself has actually three key kind of initiatives, the first of which being the West Harbour redevelopment, of which we're mainly focused here today. The second is on our strategic initiatives, the downtown entertainment assets, as an example, as well as the Barton Tiffany lands, the Aon Studio Group project. And lastly is about the development of affordable housing, taking a portfolio of identified city-owned assets in order to try to drive home and actually develop shovel-ready projects for affordable housing. So these are the three elements that all kind of fit underneath the Municipal Land Development Office. So around the table here today, what I'd like to do is just first recognize and introduce all of you to the three members of that team who kind of came on and have been onboarded throughout the 2021 year. First is Jasmine Tranter. She's our senior development consultant focusing on affordable housing. Jasmine actually comes to us and recruited from the city of Vancouver, of which she actually did similar projects in Vancouver and worked for the Secretariat of Affordable Housing for the city of Vancouver. A planner by training and by profession. She's originally from Ottawa, and now kind of we were able to recruit her back here. So she came on board about 6 months ago or 7 months ago and is working on multiple projects within the city of Hamilton, looking at those assets. In particular, for this group, she'll be project managing the Jamesville development as it relates to the city. Second on our list is someone who many of you may know internally, Josh Van Kampen. Josh is actually coming from housing services, and originally from that had other positions within the corporation and in finance. Josh is actually our lead, taking over for Ryan McHugh, who's now our manager in tourism. Josh will be heading up the Hugh Peg assets and the downtown entertainment assets and kind of driving them forward, as well as heading up the movie studio project. And last but not least is Andrea Smith, who's the author of the report, who's before you today. Andrea is on the camera here, and she'll be giving the rest of this presentation. Andrea is a planner by profession as well. She started here, I think you're about 4 months in, Andrea, 5 months in, so to speak, coming directly from the city of Burlington. Andrea actually headed up the city of Burlington's official plan process, as well as a senior project management office that she had is there, Hamiltonian at heart, and lives here, and we were able to recruit her for the West Harbour file. So as it relates to the West Harbour portfolio itself, it'll be Andrea, but as we kind of go about over the course of of the rest of this year, you may see others in here as well. So with that all as background, I'm going to hand the floor over to Andrea to give her presentation.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so good afternoon, Chair and members of committee. My name is Andrea Smith, and I'm Senior Development Consultant for the West Harbour. I'm here today to provide a presentation related to the Discovery Centre Strategy Framework report. And this report builds on the April 28, 2021 GIC report, which directed staff to prepare a long-term strategy for the Hamilton Waterfront Trust, the former Discovery Centre. My presentation will lay out an approach for determining the desired future state use for this property and is the next step in moving the staff direction forward. Essentially, the report sets out a decision-making process that results in a defined vision for the property that's complementary to the West Harbour redevelopment plan and results in a defined set of actions required to implement the vision. And together, those two elements are the strategy. The report is a recommendation report, and the first is that staff be authorized and directed to implement the Discovery Centre strategy framework outlined in Appendix A. And the second is that staff be directed to report back to committee in Q1 2023 with a recommended long-term strategy for the property. In my presentation, I'll provide some site and land use context, outline key objectives in establishing a clear vision for the site, identify the range of decision types that we'll need to make through this work, introduce draft strategic principles to guide the decision-making process, and present the Discovery Centre strategy framework, which sets out the decision-making process itself. So to start off, I'll take a moment to provide site context to the Discovery Centre, which is referred to as subject lands in the report. On this slide, Piers 5, 6, 7, and 8 are illustrated in yellow dashed line as broader planning context area, and within the red boundary area, the northwest corner of Pier 8 are the subject lands. And zooming in a bit on this slide, the subject lands in the red line are comprised of the former Discovery Centre building, as well as the functionally adjacent surrounding lands, which include the outdoor patio located to the north, the landscape area located to the east, parking area located to the south. And just wanted to note on this map doesn't show the recent changes to the parking just to the south that you may have experienced, and excludes the public parking promenade lands which wrap the building. And also to clarify, it excludes any lands subject to the development agreement with the Waterfront Shores partners. Next, I'd like to provide some additional background about the property. The Discovery Centre is a city-owned facility. Initially, it was built and operated as the Parks Canada Marine Discovery Centre and previously owned by the federal government. Most recently, until its closure, it was used as a restaurant and waterfront patio and an informal event and meeting facility. Upon closure, the restaurant furnishings and fixtures were removed, leaving the former restaurant primarily a vacant, open interior space. Parks Canada still occupies the northeast portion of the building as office space, but the building is primarily vacant. Since March 2020, event bookings have been limited due to the pandemic, but interest in future bookings has begun to increase. Due to the underutilization of the space, there is currently minimal revenue being generated by the property. And during the summer of 2021, staff implemented a temporary programming and animation plan, which provided a number of public art and community gathering opportunities, such as pop-ups at Pier 8, which attracted people to the waterfront. In terms of land use context, in looking into the applicable land use policy and zoning, one of the key findings was that the land use permissions are quite restrictive, making it difficult to reuse and repurpose the property under the current permissions. The lands are designated institutional in the West Harbour Secondary Plan setting sail and zoned community institutional. And this is because during the planning process for setting sail, the former Canadian Marine Discovery Centre Museum was recognized as an existing institutional use, and given this, the property was designated accordingly. Although the museum is no longer operational, the uses permitted on the property remain restricted to institutional, and the property is underutilized currently. This is the result of several factors, including the closure of the museum, a subsequent change in property ownership from federal to municipal government, and constraints of applicable zoning bylaw regulations in attracting new uses. Within the building, the uses are restricted to uses like a long-term care facility, museum, a daycare, place of worship. And on the surrounding lands, uses are generally restricted to park and recreation uses or a small-scale restaurant, but on the lands on the perimeter of the building itself. Commercial uses, such as a standard restaurant or outdoor commercial patios, are not permitted. Although recent uses of the property did include a restaurant and outdoor patio, these uses are not permitted under the current city's ownership or the zoning currently in place. The changed property ownership from federal government to city and the changed planning context, property use constraints, along with the passage of time since the policy and zoning regulations were originally established, provides an opportunity to re-examine options for the use of these lands. So the process ahead will enable the city to define a vision for the long-term use of the property. A property that has a clear role within the West Harbour will help achieve a number of objectives. First is to increase community satisfaction. So desirable uses here will attract people, animating the waterfront, supporting placemaking, and increasing community satisfaction of amenities within the West Harbour. Second, to attract desired uses. So established land use permissions will provide clarity for successfully attracting desired uses and operators. Third is to catalyze economic development and potentially generate revenue. A fully occupied building with fully operating uses will serve as an economic development catalyst and potentially generate revenue sources supporting the implementation of the West Harbour redevelopment plan. And fourth is to improve the asset management decision-making. So confirmation of the desired future state uses of these lands will improve asset management efforts such as property asset maintenance, operations, and capital investment decisions in this property. And finally, to improve corporate service planning efforts, confirmation of the desired future state uses will enable various city departments to align their service plans supporting strategic service planning and delivery involving this property, such as tourism, parks operation, culture and placemaking, recreation, and others. So as we move forward through the process, there'll be a number of alternatives developed for how the property can be used, and a range of decisions will need to be made through the process. We'll need to make decisions around uses such as permitted land uses. So what are the land uses that are complementary to the West Harbour redevelopment? What changes to the current land use framework are required to enable these complementary uses? And property ownership and or operating model decisions. So what is the desired property ownership and operating model for each of those desired uses? As well as investment decisions. What should the city do with the lands and the future of the building? And process decisions. What efforts, such as marketing and planning efforts, are required to permit and attract desired uses? In summary, this slide is intended to depict the range of decisions we'll be making, and community and stakeholders will be engaged throughout this decision-making process. As part of developing the long-term strategy for the Discovery Centre, there'll be many options considered and decisions made. And establishing strategic principles is an important part of a decision-making process. So on this slide are draft principles to guide the strategy development phase and should be applied comprehensively throughout the process. And page 9 of the report provides some additional descriptions behind each of these strategic principles. It's expected that these will be evolved through the process through community and stakeholder feedback, and then used moving forward through the decision-making process. So just running through this list, A is alignment to the principles of the setting sale secondary plan. So, options for levering the property will align to the key relevant principles of this plan. So for example, maintaining a continuous public access along the water's edge and creating a diverse, balanced, and animated waterfront and celebrating the city's heritage. B, fostering vibrant community interaction. So this will be fostered through a mix of public uses and public serving commercial uses that are adaptable as the waterfront becomes a mature community. The mix of uses catalyze animation of public spaces and enhance the enjoyment of the West Harbour day and night and throughout the seasons. C is we'll leverage this prime waterfront property so that its design and function enhance the West Harbour and contribute to Hamilton's city building objectives. We will incorporate sustainable building and development features into potential modifications to the building and or property. And E is we will maintain public access around the waterfront promenade. And F is financial sustainability. Use of this property will result in the ongoing capital and operating requirements to be met throughout identification of sustainable funding sources. The intent is to consult with the community and stakeholders on these draft principles, obtain feedback, and make modifications to them as appropriate. We'll then refer to these principles throughout the decision-making process, using them as guideposts along the way. So now turning to the proposed strategy framework as contained in Appendix A of the report, I'll focus on outlining the decision-making process itself and highlight the key deliverables, timing, and council decision points. This slide is a summary of Appendix A in the staff report. The framework consists of 2 phases and 4 steps. The first phase is to develop the strategy, and the second phase is to implement the strategy. As previously mentioned, the purpose of phase 1 is to define the desired vision for the property and what set of actions are required to implement them. The 3 steps within this phase are approve the decision-making framework, and that's where we are today. Step 2 is to conduct the opportunity study. And this step consists of conducting research, identifying opportunities and constraints, generating various options, and consulting with the public and various stakeholders. And step 3 is confirming the vision. So this step consists of analyzing the options, selecting the preferred option based on analysis, and making a decision to implement the strategy as shown by the yellow star. During this phase, communication and engagement with the public, external stakeholders, and internal staff will be conducted. Deliverables within phase 1 include staff reports, which will provide summary of research findings, community feedback, potential strategy options, and ultimately a recommended preferred option for the property. It is anticipated that the timeline to complete the 3 steps in phase 1 is from now to Q1 2023. The key milestone of phase 1 is a council decision to approve the preferred option, the strategy essentially itself, and authorizing staff to proceed to phase 2, which is strategy implementation. And then next is phase 2, which is the strategy implementation. The purpose of this phase is to act on council's decision by implementation of the vision. It's expected that the implementation will include a variety of actions, not necessarily a singular action. An example of a phase 2 outcome is to move forward with any required planning approval processes and to initiate real estate transactional processes if such actions are required and approved by council. Should any planning approvals be an outcome of this phase, public consultation will occur in accordance with the Planning Act and city protocols as required. Additional council decisions will be identified and warranted throughout that phase as well. So in summary, the Discovery Centre property is a key asset within the West Harbour, and that there's an exciting opportunity ahead to rethink and revision this prime waterfront property. The proposed framework, as contained in Appendix A of the staff report, is the recommended path to develop the strategy to do this work. And to support council's decision-making on this property, staff will bring additional reports forward based on research, analysis, and community input for council's consideration. So that concludes my presentation, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Andrea. We have the mayor, but first, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to ensure I'm up to date on the file as it pertains to this particular property. So through you, Chair, to Chris or perhaps to Andrea, have we at all engaged in an exercise with the community about this parcel in our previous rounds of consultation on the West Harbour, or are we starting anew?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I wouldn't say we engaged. As far as I recollect in our kind of engagement, we didn't engage specifically on the Discovery Centre as an entity. There's no question that throughout the community engagement process of the entire Pier 8 process, we've had comments and kind of indirect conversations about the Discovery Centre, but this would be the first time, and thus the reason why the recommendation before you today. This would kind of be the first time that we've focused in on the Discovery Centre specifically and about the long-term use for it.
Councillors had a community meeting too. We had about 90 people, maybe 5 years ago, invited staff, and then we actually voted on ideas. Each person had so I have that recorded and can share that at the appropriate time too, but that's more of a political meeting that we held probably about 5 years ago, Councillor. Go ahead, Councillor Wilson.
No, thank you. That's good to know. And if you're willing and able to share that, I would welcome it. And through you to Chris, if you do have anything set out. If you wouldn't mind sharing that as well, I would appreciate it. Thank you. My questions are just seeking clarity a little bit on the items which appear on page 8 and page 9 under key objectives in developing a long-term strategy. This question might seem a little weird, but it actually is rooted in some of my subsequent questions. So the point to increase community satisfaction, who is the community in which we're speaking?
Through the chair to Councillor Wilson, the intention here is the broader community. It wasn't segmented in any particular way, just that this is a prime waterfront property and it's not currently being utilized, and so just having people connect with the waterfront. So yeah, sorry, just to summarize, there wasn't a specific community segment that was identified here.
Thanks. The reason I asked that because I think it will play itself out in some of the comments. And I think it's always been, in my opinion, the inherent tension in this development. Is it, are we developing a neighborhood and therefore a neighborhood that is, some of it is very established in the North End. Some of, all of another parcel have yet to appear. And is it a neighborhood or is it a destination? And if it's a destination, then some of our deliverables or objectives may be different than if we are approaching it as a neighborhood, because there will be people living in what will be a very dense development, whom we won't know what their needs are. We won't know maybe what their preferences are. And that's what I find a little struggling with that. My other question is the objectives that are on page 8 and 9, they seem to make reference to use in and around the building as opposed to within the building. So you talk about attracting people, animating the waterfront, supporting placemaking, ensuring access to the waterfront. Just looking for your assurance, is the consultation going to be asking questions about what people are hoping to see within the building as well, or is that determined by your use of the word public serving commercial uses? Through the chair.
Through the chair to Councillor Wilson, yes, I can give assurances that it's to look both in the placemaking and animation is one element of it, but uses of the building very specifically within it will be looked at. I think we recognize that the building could have dual roles. I think it could have a role for both public uses function as well as some of the more private uses, but could still serve the community. And so what I meant by, so one of the strategic principles had public uses and public serving commercial uses, meaning something like a restaurant, for example, could be a public serving commercial use, but it still would be a private use. And that would get into some of the ownership decisions that we'll need to make at who would run that kind of use. As we go forward and engage with multiple stakeholders, we will be looking for uses, how the site would function around the building as well as in the building, and have a look at very specific public uses as well as other uses that are maybe private or commercial that could serve the public.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. One final question, I think, from me with respect to scope and definition. And you just referenced it, Andrea, property ownership. And could you speak to me about the relationship between how that will be determined along with the goal of financial sustainability, which I, correct me, interpret to mean it can't generate a net operating cost, or has that to be determined, and how will that affect the decision on property ownership?
Through the chair to Councillor Wilson, the maybe just addressing the financial sustainability one first.
Sure.
That one is simply in recognition that currently there isn't a funding model that's associated with the building, and so that needs to be remedied through this process. So it's one of the considerations. We recognize that in some of these objectives that they're conjoined, that there's a relationship between some of them, and some of them might need to be made in certain stages to enable the next decision. So financial sustainability in its own right, we need to come up with a model that makes sense, that's financially sustainable for this property. The ownership piece, just recognizing that there could be multiple ways to deliver or to ensure that successful uses are on the property. It could be through leasing out certain uses or having certain operators come in to take over some of the uses, or it could be that some elements of the building are completely managed and run by the city itself. All those decisions about who's running what aspect of that building still needs to be sorted out. And it doesn't have to be one specific thing. It could be partnerships. We could carve up the building in certain ways so that we have multiple models running.
If I could just add, Mr. Chair, on the fiscal sustainability, just to put a finer point on it, on Andrea's comment, it's a recognition that there is a cost of the building, and it does not necessarily mean that it has to be generated from revenue outside, but it is a recognition that there needs to be some funding source that's sustainable. So therefore, using a great example, if it's going to continue to be city-owned and have a completely public use, then it is going to require a funding source for that to kind of be maintained. And so it's just kind of the eyes wide open kind of look at the analysis to kind of say, at some point in time, we need to, and we're hoping this framework does it, needs to evaluate all the different variables and finally kind of check them all off as we kind of go.
Okay, thank you. If I have time, Mr. Chair, just one more question.
Yeah,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
The present state of the building, and forgive me if it's not this report, but I'm bleeding the reports. It states obviously that the previous restaurant has no longer there, and they've taken much of the infrastructure with them. And it says that there hasn't been a lot of requests for its use, but that's changing, maybe because people know more about it, or maybe I don't know the role of COVID. But as it exists right now, Chris, does the building require public investment for use? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It's kind of generalities. I can give you a response, but kind of in very high level generalities, because the part of the key of this framework is to dive into those. Generally speaking, right, the building's in great shape from a high level perspective. It does have its limitations in the fact that it was designed for the use that it was originally designed for. Even on the restaurant side, it was a retrofit for that purpose. Many of the kitchen fixtures, as an example, are not there anymore. With that said, it's also a building that's, give or take 20 years old, and will have capital requirements to it in order to keep it going. So we do have a building condition assessment report, and we want to enhance that as part of this framework and use that as part of the criteria, or at least part of the information to inform our decision as we go forward. That being said, right, there's elements of it that it's kind of an as-is type of facility. If you went in and it met your purposes, a great example is the one meeting room. It's a fantastic room for exactly that, for a meeting room. There's another area of the building that is kind of down to the concrete floor and would need some construction and build out on it as well. So, it's got functioning washrooms, obviously, and the space, the community, or the common area space. But it does need some there's costs as it relates to just the normal operating, and then there's some capital costs that we've identified.
Thank you very much for your answers. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor Fred.
Thank you. And, it was actually a proud day when we're able to secure the site from our federal partners in lieu of an ongoing lawsuit. So, a great, valuable piece of property that I think is going to serve us well into the future. I had the opportunity yesterday to do a little walk around before the snow came along with my my dear old Dash, who thought it was frightfully cold out there, but we enjoyed watching the ice crash up against the seawall, which was actually quite interesting, and got to have a great look at the recreational amenities that are there that look fantastic. So the whole area is starting to become what we'd all hope it would become, which I think is a dynamic space. Just in my mind, just to be clear, I've always seen it as a two-stream process. It's yes, it's a local neighborhood asset as well as a broader community asset, and I think we need to continue to think of it that way. It's hopefully with the right kind of uses and the front end recreational aspect of it, very much a destination and an opportunity for the city as a whole to come to their waterfront. And got a good kick out of watching the skating rink be very active yesterday, and I'm sure it will be again in the coming days and weeks. Which leads me to my question, and I've long kind of thought about what the opportunity is in this location, and I know there's been lots of visioning on behalf of members of our community, and I think this is a great opportunity to turn our mind to that. But I also wonder whether or not the building site itself is somewhat limited in terms of opportunity, and I think I asked you this question, Chris, by email, if we shouldn't be considering a kind of larger geographic area as a kind of an opportunity. So I'm thinking about the Williams Coffee Pub location, which is also an aging building. Not that I want to do away with the skating rink, but they can be built into or rebuilt into, any kind of a development. So I'm thinking of why we wouldn't broaden out our opportunity base there for a larger geographic piece of that property. I know we've drawn the line essentially around the Discovery Center boundary. In my mind, and you can answer this, Chris or Andrea, in terms of opportunity and ability to have a broader look at what could be done with a larger site that might include many of the uses that are already there and then some. Should we not be looking at the Williams Coffee location, the lands between that and the Discovery Center, some of the space that is green space in behind the skating rink? What are your thoughts in terms of why we wouldn't broaden that out to be able to provide, I think, additional opportunity?
Chris, or
whatever that is, and
Yeah.
I'm not here to presuppose what the opportunity is. I love the Discovery Center building, by the way. It's one of those brilliant architectural buildings that I think will stand the test of time. However, I think there are still, vision that needs to be done, and I fully support that. I just wonder if we shouldn't broaden our horizon. By the way, great work happening on the Piers 5, 6, and 7. That certainly is going to propose an awful lot of opportunity as well in terms of destination locations that folks from around the city can come and be part of and enjoy. But I think there's enough volume there to look at all of that.
Chris?
So through you, Mr. Chair, to the mayor, and what if I start, and then Andrea, if there's anything that that you want to add, that'd be great. To the fundamental question, yes, if you wish us to expand the boundary, we certainly are in your hands. I will say from a staff perspective, one of the things that we're cognizant of, and that maybe doesn't totally come out in the report, is that there is a zoning, as Andrea talked about the zoning of the building. There's also separate zoning as it relates to the other land area where the ice rink is. Generally speaking, it's park zoning. And so one of the hesitations from staff's perspective on expanding it too far out is to, some of the practical realities of, what are the questions that we're asking? Are we asking whether or not the rink stays or goes? Are we asking whether the public space can be redeveloped? So it's kind of a little bit of the scoping exercise for that. The building is obviously a little different because it's actually physically there and there's uses into it. And we kind of thought as staff that by expanding it, it would draw in those other questions. If subcommittee wishes us to do that, and then yes, for sure. What it may take is for us to scope that a little differently. And so, maybe that means that the step 2 part of Andrea's process may take slightly a little longer because it's now incorporating other uses and how those complementary uses are to each other. But if that was direction that that you and therefore council wanted to give us, we would certainly take that. Andrea, anything you wish to add on?
Thank you, Chris. I have nothing to add.
Mayor Fred?
Yeah, which, I don't want to complicate the issue, but I guess I'm going to. It seems to me that there is value in some airspace. There's opportunity that can be kind of be envisioned on in terms of that entire landmass. Not that I want anything to go away, but nothing is ever permanent, and I don't want that to be the barrier to kind of creative thinking about what's possible on the entirety of that site, as opposed to just the Discovery Center building. And in my mind, I want a skating rink in and around the waterfront. That's been long been a vision, and I think Waterfront Trust made it happen. God bless them for that. We provided some good funding to make that happen. I like the idea of a coffee shop that is on the waterfront as well. It's been a very positive and attractive attraction, but it should not be excluded. But there are opportunities beyond that, over and above, or beside, or around, that could augment all of that. So I'm thinking that if we just take everything as is and try to fit things into it, as opposed to looking at the site and saying, what's possible here on a grander scale. Not necessarily 80 feet tall, but in more of a I'm not finding the right words on this one. I think you're getting my point. I think we limit ourselves if it's just the Discovery building, and we open up the door to greater possibilities if we look at a broader land base. So I'll hear other comments, but it'd certainly be my interest to have that happen as part of this review. And maybe the review comes back and says, you know what, there's no value in doing that. We shouldn't bother looking at the broader land mass. Maybe we should just narrow on the Discovery Center building. But I can't imagine that broader opportunity wouldn't create more innovation, creativity, and possibilities. And so I would just put that on the table and certainly look forward to any additional discussion. I assume we are not discussing the lease issue with Waterfront Shores at this point. That's the next item.
Yeah.
And I apologize. This has
okay.
been a messed up day for me, like for most. I'm working on one platform that I'm barely got WebEx on somebody else's laptop, and I'm got my phone happening at the same time, so I don't have an agenda in front of me. But look, there's lots of possibility potential here at this site, as you know. It is primed to be not only a destination, but a great place to live. Nice combination of things. I still want to live there, and not that I'm ever going to achieve that, but I'll do my best. And it's I think we ought to be leave the door open to as fulsome a potential as we can. And I think just limiting it to the Discovery Center building, I think has a limitation to it that I think could be opened up. Anyway,
just for my own clarity, and I think I caught most of what you're saying. We already have, through the direct result of years of public engagement, a 30-meter wide trail commitment around there and all around. We already have, through the same kind of engagement, our plans for Pier 5, 6, 7. So are you speaking specifically of because this is about going forward with a strategy on visioning, and it includes the engagement piece, throwing in the piece of Pier 8 that includes the Waterfront Trust assets, so just above Pier 5 and 6, or are you also talking about kind of reinventing what the vision is for 5, 6, and 7.
No, no, I'm
The
not talking about
promenade.
that at all. No, 5, 6, and 7, we've got, I think by and large have
Okay.
a strong vision on that. I'm just talking about the lands adjacent to
Okay,
the
gotcha.
Discovery Center and what that might mean for future potential development.
So waterfront trust lands. Okay, that's great. We at the trust are
Well,
doing we're doing a vision exercise anyway.
With all due respect, Waterfront Trust managed lands
Sorry,
that
good
actually
point.
are owned and by
Yeah.
the city of Hamilton.
My apologies. Correct. And the timing could be perfect for that. So I'm glad you brought it up. Councillor Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm certainly not opposed to the mayor's suggestion. In fact, I think maybe what we should do is, if there's a willingness to even consider that, maybe what we do is we pass a motion and ask this committee's staff support to come back to the next meeting for the inclusion of those lands immediately to the well, who knows what direction that is. Is that east or is that north or whatever the case is? But the lands involving Williams and the skating rink for inclusion. I don't think we can deal with that immediately, but I think we could deal with inclusion in the study in the short term. I have a number of questions. Andrea, could you take us back to, and we're just talking about the block. So basically the map that's on the image that's on page 21 of 54, which shows the Parks Canada Marine Discovery Center, the block of land around it. So remind me or us what the zoning is on that property, and then in turn, what the permitted uses within that block of land are.
Through the chair to Councillor Russ, if at any time it would assist, I could put the slide back up and we can have that to kind of ground the conversation. If just let me know.
Once you do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Page 21 of 54 in your report, or Appendix B it is. That's it.
Okay. So, so the zoning line, this isn't obviously a zoning map, but these, if I was to call it up, if the building itself is institutionally zoned, meaning that the actual building, so normally when you look at a zoning map, it will follow a property line, but this is, this is all now city land, and so it doesn't sort of correlate with a normal property. The boundary of the institutional zoning applies to the building, like the footprint of the building itself. And that is in terms of speaking about zoning, it's the I2. Full zoning name is I2 exception 486 with a holding on it. Permitted uses within an I2 are, I don't have them all in front of me, but are things like community type uses. There are like a long-term care facility, a place of worship, community garden, day nursery, duplex dwelling, educational establishment, emergency shelter, museum, recreation, place of worship, retirement home, library, medical offices, social services establishment, long-term care facility. That's part of the exception. The lands that are around it are a park zoning, and that is a P4 with an exception. And the P4 is botanical garden, cemetery, community garden, conservation golf course, excluding mini golf, marina, recreation, seasonal campground, urban farm. So these are just sort of standard uses that would be within a P4 use. The P4 exception actually broadens it somewhat and allows, one of the interesting things of what it allows, I won't read everything, but it does allow a restaurant, but on the park itself.
Okay.
But the restaurant use is not permitted in the institutional building.
Okay, that's helpful. That's Councillor Farr, you're able to hit drives or play water shots off that lands. God knows you need it.
Yeah.
So I'm pleased to hear that museum falls under one of the permitted uses in that. In your report, you didn't include that.
Mhm.
I know in the discussions of the Hamilton Museum, there's various options to be considered, which is not only here but Ockmar and that. So thanks for that clarity. Let's just talk about the study. On the basis of what you're proposing right here, is there a cost to the study, or is the cost included in the work plan of Mr. Phillips, your group's working budget?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, it's included in ours, and for the most part, it's really staff time. For
Okay.
the most part, it may entail maybe some facilitation services or those types of things, but yes, there is capital budget money for West Harbour that we would be utilizing.
Okay. And my final question, and then once again, it's back to the Parks Canada Marine Discovery Center. Structurally, you talked about, yes, things need to be done in that, but using the old terminology, does the building have good bones? I mean, that's one of the challenges we're finding now with, yes, the school is surplusing a lot of their schools, but when we look at them from their usefulness or whatever, they're just not worth our while of repurposing those particular buildings. What about the Discovery Center? Is a structural assessment been done of that building currently or in the past, or will there be?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we've done a building conditions report that kind of looks at the main elements. And yes, the building itself is generally speaking fine, but it is identifying capital needs both in the present or in the current kind of time frame, but also a little bit more for the long term. That said, I think that would be we would obviously drill down into that a lot further as part of this study. And last but not least, if we the one caveat to all of that is comment that I made earlier on, which is remembering that it was actually designed. You made it right on for a museum, and so therefore, as you try to retrofit other uses potentially into the building, it may not be a question of nothing to do with structure, but it's certainly a question as to, what kind of renovations can you do with a building that initially was designed for say a much different purpose. But we'll get into that as part of the framework. And if we had to do those types of more detailed studies, then we'll certainly bring that in as far as Andrea's report when we report back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm certainly supportive of the direction that Mr. Phillips and Ms. Smith are recommending to us here. I think the mayor's suggestion is worthy of consideration. Maybe not today, but maybe at the next meeting, because it's something that will come up another day, and that's when how should we say, the longevity of the building that's housing the Williams Coffee Pug and the ancillary uses that are in that block become a challenge for the municipality. So we can either think about it sooner rather than later. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Powers. I'm putting myself on the list, and I pass the chair to Councillor Wilson, I believe. Thank you. So I appreciate the discussion. I just on Councillor Powers' last point, I'm the same. We actually, as operators, the Waterfront Trust Board will be meeting soon, and it would be better to discuss what the mayor has proposed. I'm certainly not opposed to what the mayor has proposed, but it would be great to have that discussion. And I say that in what I tried to blurt out earlier. We're kind of going through some visioning anyway, and the timing is great. And so at the next, whenever we want to have our next West Harbour Development Subcommittee, maybe we can come up with a concept that does include, as was prudently suggested, the parcel that's currently operated and the amenities therein, the skating rink, the ice cream, the Williams, and everything else into what we have before us today. But focused on what we have before us today, I'm very supportive. And I just, from some of the stuff that I heard, quick question through you, Councillor Wilson, to Andrea or Chris. but you talked about zoning not permitting certain uses, and yet we have had quite obviously the banquets. Waterfront Trust acts through facilities as a booker, albeit, as you rightly mentioned, very slow through the pandemic. Can we just get it on the record how we're able to bypass the current zoning and carry out these almost restaurant type uses or banquet hall type uses currently?
Through you, Mr. Or Madam Chair, do you want, sorry, Andrea, do you want me to start and then maybe you add?
Just as a quick reminder is fine.
Yep. So,
Yep.
so it's mainly through the fact that it's municipally owned building. There are municipal uses that are allowed as far as a permitted use in municipally owned building, and as long as those uses are temporary in nature and for some form of a a public benefit, where we're talking about animation and public animation, then those uses are permitted. It's when you start to get into the gray area of that starts to become uses on the permanency or uses that are very specifically commercial in nature. And so that's kind of the how we're interpreting those uses for the bookings that they are today. That somebody may come in and say they want to do a wedding or a banquet, or even in our own context, we do meetings there at different times. So that's kind of the element of the zoning. That's it's the municipal use portion.
And through you, Chair.
Andrea, sorry, just Andrea's a planner, so I'll see if Andrea wants to just add or correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. No, just maybe just to mention that some of the other mechanisms that the city has used to bring activity down there has been through special occasion permits for temporary uses, and so but that is just a temporary stopgap. That isn't sending sort of the longer term messages to the market of how to get a long term stable use in the building. So it's useful, and it's definitely. Pardon me.
Go ahead. I didn't let you finish. Go ahead.
Yeah, those are special occasion permits rather than having embedded in the zoning certain uses that would offer stability to the function of the building.
Yeah, the current function was always a stopgap. It was to do something as opposed to nothing, and maybe get a little bit of revenue. And as you rightly pointed out, Andrea, the pandemic hasn't helped at all. Albeit the pop-up, which was an idea born out of this committee, I think before your time, had its successes, and I was pleased to move that we actually contemplate, and we ended up using that massive patio space, which, by the way, is the biggest and probably best looking patio in the city, which gets to my next point through you, Madam Chair. The bones question was a really good one from Councillor Powers, because I mean, this is you could see a federal project from the get-go that spared no expense. It is a beautiful building. It should be designated. I think we all agree it's iconic building, and was maybe from the time they hung the whale in the lobby. So it has been adaptively reused. That patio alone was a $2 million cement job. The transformation into a restaurant. Were there any indications where we have transformed that building in use over the years that proved to be more of a challenge, or did they go off smoothly through you?
Through you, Madam Chair. As far as my recollection is, the main kind of retrofit or repurposing was from the museum to the restaurant use, and of course, yep, it was done. It was done in a fantastic manner. That being said, I was not in on the. It was not a project that I was involved in per se, but even just a tour of the building itself would kind of. I would argue that probably at the time it was, although done very well, it was probably difficult to do because you are talking about a wide open span of the entire building. That being said, that would definitely be part of what we will look at when we look at all the details of the building going forward.
And
But
Chris,
sorry, Mr. Chair. Last on that, I don't recall any other retrofit, although I could be mistaken at that.
Yep, no, I'm being close to it. I don't remember anything other than maybe some plumbing getting out to the center of that patio, but it no huge challenges. Through you, Chris, while we have you, just this what's before us today is the result of I think a vision we've been talking about for some years, notwithstanding our minutes show our April motion, and we asked for the long-term strategy for Hamilton Waterfront Trust Center, former Discovery Center. But it goes back probably, what would you say, 2018, 2017? There was a motion in there at one point, and correct me if I'm wrong, or there was discussion at one point that we you get the value, the market value of the building, and see if there's any takers, if I'm not mistaken, from the private sector. Was that exercise ever part of these, feeling out processes that are leading finally to some clarity and the vision exercise here today? Through you, Chair. Final question.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, there's no lack of history, obviously, on the Discovery Center building itself. The direction in the report kind of goes through the background. There's been several motions about it over time. Some of the history of it has been complicated by ownership and leases, and dating back, I believe it's to 2018. Those elements have all been removed, and now it's for the last few years, it's completely in the hands of the city, both ownership-wise, lease-wise, and for us to look at the future of the building. I will say back in 2020, December, I think, I did highlight this as one of the key emerging issues that I think this subcommittee and council and us as staff need to tackle. The time is right for us to do this. It's probably long overdue, but I think the framework that Andrea has proposed is holistic in nature. And I think that's the feedback that I was receiving throughout all the community engagement, was that that instead of doing things ad hoc, that we kind of look at it in a holistic way and put a framework together to get us to a decision making. So yes, to kind of answer, go back to your question, yes, there's been multiple motions and directions over time. I think what we've tried to do here with this report is bring those things all together, as well as bringing some of the engagement that's happened, both the stuff that we did with the West Harbour, but also, Councillor, the engagement that you've done, both with the trust and as the councillor in the area, and try to bring it into one framework and finally kind of get us down to a path to make a holistic and kind of important recommendations down the road.
And I agree with what you just said. The timing is actually very good, and I think finally I'll just say, as I take the chair back, because it was you, Councillor Wilson, that brought it up, and I think I even seen you over the years at some of these meetings, especially at Jamesville and Bonetto. One meeting I think you were at might not have been Waterfront specific, but I think you'll agree, and anyone who's watching from the neighborhood historically, they will engage. I appreciate that. We want to make sure it is their neighborhood, and I can tell you over 11 years now, there's a lot of very, very excited people. And I think once the snow melts and they see, we finally have those pieces we've been waiting for that have been held up by this pandemic, just for Cops Pier alone, and then the work, that the exciting finish of big aspects of the work at 567, they're going to see what the fruits of their discussions and engagement and ideas and input over 20 years now. They're finally getting to see some of that stuff, and this will be as good or maybe even better, Chris, in terms of letting them in from the neighborhood. Everyone's welcome, obviously, and if history proves true, they will very much have their voices heard, and they will be present for those discussions. So that's a good part of all of this. I'll take the chair back, and I think we have Councillor Wilson for a second time. And thank you for taking the chair.
No problem. I just wanted clarification. I like the mayor's idea of expanding the footprint of this possibility. I'm just seeking some guidance on jurisdiction and what informs what. So I heard the mayor clarify that it is publicly owned property, that down to Williams. I also heard that it's being, the caretaker is that of the Hamilton Waterfront Trust, and they're undergoing a visioning exercise, if I understand the chair. What exercise would lead in the determination of this? What informs what? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Apologies, Councillor Wilson. Is that a question directed at staff?
I think it's more, Chris, that
Or is
Mayor
it to
Fred
the
could probably,
chairs?
Mayor Fred could probably share what he envisioned there on who would lead that kind of engagement. I'm assuming, Councillor Wilson, it would be an exercise that he wanted to join this particular outline, and so therefore it would be staff. But Mayor Fred, who would lead if we were doing that? The discussions on the expanded parcels that you've brought up.
City staff. I mean, I know what I see is, and with all due respect to the Waterfront Trust, and we have a great value there, and I'm not trying to end run anyone. I appreciate the envisioning exercise, but I think the visioning exercise ought to be the broader piece rather than one piece on the Discovery Center and another effort happening on the Waterfront Trust side, including the Williams Building and everything else. So I see it as one effort that hopefully will, value from the input from the Waterfront Trust and community at large and everyone else.
So if I could ask a supplementary to that, then, Mr. Mayor, would you envision the Waterfront Trust as one of many stakeholders in this process? Because there may not be a pure alignment in the vision or the objectives of the Waterfront Trust in this larger parcel. And comparing that to perhaps the city, it may not be, but in the end, I think for reasons of accountability, if it is publicly owned and it's going to be Mr. Phillips' crew publicly leading, then those public principles and objectives, I would assume the Waterfront Trust would have to support and be, those principles would have to be supportive of that public vision as the landowners the city is.
Correct. So if that's addressed to me, again, I would see it as the trust being one of the stakeholders that would be part of the overall discussion on what happens to those lands collectively. It'd be one of many. Obviously, the Waterfront Shores, organization, the community at large, any number of potential users that are looking at pairs 5, 6, and 7, existing tenants that are already there. I mean, all of that, I think, becomes part of the overall review of that site.
Yeah, I'm seeking this clarification now and early, as opposed to later, if, for example, there was any conflict between visions or proposed visions for the broader area. Thank you.
And can I just, for clarity, it's a really good talking point, and that's why we do these committee work. The envisioning exercise with the Waterfront Trust, there's no set date to my understanding. We only meet every couple of months. So I just want to get that clear. And then again, for clarity too, the other thing about the Waterfront Trust, absolutely one voice among many, many voices, community, city. If we were to join an exercise like this, and historically, I can tell you two things. No one's going to want, in the end, I'll make this prediction, the rink or the coffee shop gone. But we have always been open to and have always heard about other opportunities to fill what is a shared mandate of bringing people to the water's edge. Same exact mandate with the trust as the city. So there are probably lots of opportunities, and certainly we had lots of discussions about a couple of parcels closing in or closer to the Discovery Center in the past. So absolutely. Anyway, I'm good. And unless I said something that you want to respond to, Councillor Wilson, I think we can move on to move the motion. Mayor Fred, you want to move it?
No, not yet. So I do have myself on for a second time. I was answering questions a moment ago, but thank you. And I guess that there's two issues to come to mind. Obviously, the zoning issue, and being owner of the land, and I know there's been a long, protracted process on this, but should we decide that other alternate uses beyond what's in the kind of the desired in the prescribed zoning, other than short term, what's the challenge in terms of potentially having to change the zoning to accommodate different uses Through you to Chris.
To Andrea.
So,
or Chris?
so why don't I start on the first part, and Andrea, maybe you can on the specific process through you to the mayor, or sorry, through you, Chair, to the mayor. The framework is actually looking to get exactly to that. What are the types of uses? Kind of looking at the framework first, as far as what are the types of uses that we can kind of all agree on, and then what does that mean from a zoning perspective? So it certainly was not going to be only looking at the narrow uses. It was to look at the broader uses. With that said, if it does require, if those uses would require a process and a zoning rezoning, or maybe even an official plan amendment, then that would kind of be part of the process of Andrea's step 2 or stage 2 of this process, which is, okay, so do we as the city go and do those applications ourselves? Do we leave them for somebody else to do them? And where do we go from there? But the idea would be not closing ourselves in the framework to just the existing uses, but recognizing that if we did want a use that does not fit the narrow uses that are there today, then that would take more time and another process. Lastly, I'd say, just from a history on the file, remembering that those processes are sometimes, many have been appealed to whether it be the Ontario Municipal Board or LPAT or the Ontario Land Tribunal, I think is what it's called these days. And so therefore, again, right, it's just making sure that everybody understands that there may be a timing element of those processes that need to be taken into consideration. Sorry, Andrea, was there anything that you'd like to add on process-wise?
No, thank you, Chris. I think that you covered it.
General Manager Thorne's on the meeting too, Mayor Fred, and yours was a zoning planning type of question. Did you want to see if he wants to chime in?
Sure.
Jay, are you with us?
Yes, through the chair, I am, and I don't think I have much to add from Chris's standpoint. I think the key is that there's both there's a process question, as he said, as to how one would advance a zoning initiative, but then there's also the scope and content of that. And I think the benefit of the visioning exercise is it starts to narrow down the scope and content of what you'd want to incorporate into a zoning initiative. I'd say the one thing you certainly would want to do is, it's been our practice, if you take a look, for example, at Pier 8, is where the city kind of establishes its vision through the zoning before looking for a long-term lease or whatever the arrangement might be. So it helps to kind of solidify the vision by doing that zoning exercise in advance. And I think that's the kind of thing the staff wants to get at through the process that Andrea has outlined.
Yeah, Fred.
Thanks, Jason. I appreciate that. So to Mr. Chair, Jason, I don't want to get in an arm wrestle with the Waterfront Trust, but bottom line reality is, as I said earlier, I'm not saying let's wipe away Williams and let's wipe away a skating rink. What I am saying is, let's not have what's there cloud our vision or our potential opportunity to look to see what's possible, even including those uses beyond that. So I guess I'm looking for guidance in terms of how to formulate this. I'm interested in, as I said earlier, in including the lands that are, essentially Waterfront Trust lands that are south of the Discovery Center as part of this visioning exercise. And so I'd be prepared to move that to be included. If there's a desire to have an additional report come back, fine. I'm not sure it needs to be held up, but I'm open to suggestions as to how you might want to advance that.
Okay, thank you. Looks like Chris wanted to chime in.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, from our perspective, if you did want to do that, probably the easiest way would be to just amend the subject lands definition to include those lands that you're saying. Andrea, would you concur? That would probably be the easiest way, and therefore we'd basically, on the mapping, we would redraw the red line to include the lands that you're talking about. I'm speaking though only from a how would you amend this report to get what you're looking for? We'll take whatever direction ultimately you're looking to give to us.
Okay.
Andrea, just a simple boundary change. Maybe just take it to the southern pier in that square. So you include everything that the Waterfront Trust operates, and I think that's where you wanted to go anyway, Mayor Fred. Minus
To
the
the
30-meter wide trail, which we're obligated to do, I think, with the setting sail secondary plan and those sorts of things.
So if I'm being asked mechanically of how to describe this, we could maybe amend, as Chris suggested, the definition of subject lands as defined in the report, be expanded to include the lands further south.
To the immediate south.
To the immediate south. I think that would be sufficient. I think that's all we would need to do.
So just to be 100% clear, I'm not talking about Piers 5, 6, and 7.
Mhm.
I'm totally respecting our obligation to maintain the waterfront trail, in that 30-meter, corridor, which I think is the limit of the Williams building in any event. I think everything ahead of that is part of the trail space. I'm talking about the lands that are managed by the Waterfront Trust that are on Pier 8 to be included in this broader visioning size, along with the Discovery Center location already identified in the mapping. So I moved that.
Seconded by Councillor Powers, or does Councillor Powers have a question? You want a second? Okay. I'll give Councillor Wilson the floor, and through you, Councillor Wilson, to Jason Thorne. So, or no, Chris, well, or Andrea. Andrea's a planner. This could entail a discussion, because if we include this in what's the approval that's being asked of us today, that means there's this visionary session, public have engagement on everything, and certainly someone's going to come forward and say, and even it was mentioned, I think, in this argument previous, there may be upzoning involved here. So would we know, and when would we know the value of that sort of upzoning of all or in part parcels going from parkland essentially to mixed use commercial and whatever height?
Ms. Smith?
I think that it's about I think what I'm absorbing here is by expanding the boundary, to what extent does that change our consultation questions? The boundary, admittedly, we were looking at the boundary, different approaches to the boundary from the way it was is being described now, to having actually a primary area and a secondary area, with the primary area being focused on the Discovery Center, because that's the driver I understood was like the priority was around determining what to do with the property itself. Part of the reason it went, we're proposing it as it was described in the report as presented, was to scope the consultation questions with the community and the stakeholders around really what to do with the building. Mm-hmm. So the implications of the boundary change is it's a bigger conversation, potentially with the types of questions that we're asking and our stakeholders. It can be added in, absolutely. In terms of timing, what that does, I'm also absorbing what that, what that may mean in terms of a consultation.
Oh boy. Okay, I'm going to interrupt. I don't want to prolong things, but that last bit, I like the timing right now, and I hope that we can maintain it. That's what we're approving here today. I mean, it's just an added piece of conversation. I would just suggest that it would be good when we get to the point of engagement that we come prepared with. I think years ago we asked for a appraised value of the Discovery Center itself, and I believe we received it. But appraised values would be helpful in sections. If things were to happen here, here's how that would reflect on what the parcels, and what, from a taxpayer standpoint, what might be advantageous, or it may be more important to just have that open space. But I'm actually, I've heard the arguments. I'm happy to support what the mayor wants to bring forward in adding it, but I would really like to know that we can still maintain those timelines. So between now and council, if we could kind of, you know, if that changes, if the timeline changes, I would like to know. So I'll reserve my right to maybe bring this up again at council. I completely appreciate it as not only a councillor, but as a Waterfront Trust board member, and also on behalf of a lot of North Enders who, you know, take a lot of pride in that particular corner of their waterfront, because let's face it, it's the one that's been active by the millions annually in fulfilling that mandate, and it's been a recreational use for them, and they got a lot of ideas. So including that along with the Discovery Center adaptive reuse potential and discussion, I'm actually, now that I give it some thought, I'm fine with it. I just don't want, as I've already mentioned, we started this discussion in 2016, 2017. I could ask Chris to bring all the motions that show, you know, we've got it in the minutes for last April, but there was all sorts of conversations and directions, I think, that have led to this point. So I don't want to slow it down, and I'm fine adding to the footprint. And I'm sure between now and council, you could also modify the red line, the hashed lines on your map, so all of council can see exactly what we're adding with Mayor Fred's amendment. I'll take the chair back. Who was the seconder? I'm sorry.
Oh, Mr. Powers. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, Mayor Fred, the mover. Got to get the last word on this.
No, and I'm not trying to. I just to remind that, you know, the whole waterfront is it's been a 25-year project. Started in 1995, and we're finally at a place where we're seeing real concrete developments happening. And you know what? I like the hurry up offense approach, but you know, there comes times when you have to look at things a little bit more comprehensively to get a longer term sustainable benefit. So I'm fully aware of the time and maybe some extra time that it might take to do this, but I think it'll stand the test of time better over the long run, and may end up benefiting the Waterfront Trust at the end of the day, or we'll see. But I certainly respect the fact that great value has been provided by the amenities we have there, and certainly they need to be considered to be part of whatever is visioned into the future. So I'm very committed to that myself as well.
Anyone else? Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All in favor?
Apologies, it's Tamara from the clerk's office. Can I just confirm, is the intention to expand subsection B, the recommendation of the report, to include that? That's what we're talking about. You're not talking about a separate report entirely, or a separate motion entirely?
No. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
With apologies, I don't have the motions in front of me, but it is to amend the review space only.
That the Discovery Center strategy framework be requested to include the lands to the south, to the immediate south, and up to the point of, you could call it the South Pier Wall. I think maybe just call it that for now, and I'm sure Aldor or somebody can tell me what we call that stretch.
I think, Chris, you know what I'm angling towards, which is basically the Waterfront Trust managed properties.
Yes, through your chair.
So Tamara, you have that? You want to just say that then?
Okay,
The Waterfront Trust managed properties.
Sure. So not an amendment to to subsection B.
Well, it is an amendment 3.
It is an amendment to subsection B. Yes. Okay. That's just what I wanted to make sure that that's what we were talking about. Okay. So I have a
You don't need to put it up.
Yeah. Okay. Just give me a section.
No, you don't need to put it up. I think we're pretty clear. So it's okay, Tamara. So all in favor of the amendment? And that's e-scribe, or raise your hand. I saw Councillor Powers and Mayor Fred Eisenberger raise their hands.
They were the mover and seconder, so I would hope
Yes.
so. Yeah. Okay. So that passes unanimously.
Wonderful.
That's
And
for the
now
amendment.
the recommendation as amended through to whomever, Mayor Fred, and seconded by Councillor Danko. Any discussion? All in favor?
Oh, bear with me for 1 second. I'm just okay. So the vote that's here is not amended, but it will be as amended.
Yes.
I've
Thank
just
you.
put up the original.
Seconded. Okay, I got a thumbs up from Councillor
So-
Powers. Moved by Mayor
Sorry,
Fred,
was the
seconded by
same-
Councillor Danko.
Okay.
Moved by Fred, seconded by Danko.
Okay.
Who
and
said,
on
while you're doing that, who said they had to leave and at what time? Councillor Powers, 3:40, did you say?
3:45 for Councillor Powers, and then I think the mayor has to leave at 4. So I have, so Mayor Eisenberger, Maureen, Councillor Wilson, and Councillor Powers are all voting in favor of the motion, the recommendation in the report as amended. Yes? Okay, then that carries unanimously.
Next up is the Pure 8 Animation Program and Hamilton Waterfront Trust.
Sorry, my apologies, Mr. Chair, if we can receive the presentation first for 8.1.
Moved by Councillor Powers and seconded by Councillor Danko to receive the presentations. Thank you, Chris and Andrea, Jason, and others who assisted. Great discussion.
Councillor Eisenberger and Mayor Eisenberger and Councillor Powers are in favor of that. Then that is all unanimous in favor.
Okay, thank you, Tamara. Next is 8.2. This is the Pure 8 Animation Program and Hamilton Waterfront Trust Center. And maybe, who knows, we'll change that name again someday. Status update, Ward 2. I don't know who's presenting. Is it Chris?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yep.
Go ahead.
So I'm going to share.
Chris, you heard about the constraints we have as a committee, although we'll still have quorum.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
I do, and I will. So the second part of today's discussion, can someone give me a thumbs up as to you're seeing it? Awesome, thank you. So the second part of today's discussion is about the second element of the approval that was given back on April 28th of 2021. With respect to the Discovery Center, there were two elements. First was the long-term strategy, which is what we just talked about. And the second was that council directed staff to go out within the community to look at potential short-term lease options. And those short-term lease options are indicated here on the screen as far as the key things that you specifically laid out for us. I do want to kind of recognize that the pandemic has obviously played a huge role in us not going too far on short-term lease, and certainly with the fact that we haven't received many submissions to it. That combined with the fact of some of these conditions that we've already discussed in the previous discussion. Certainly the zoning regulations, which actually are right in number 2 there of it, that if we're going out to lease, we're looking to lease to somebody who actually does fit the zoning permissions. I will say that although we did receive some inquiries from different parties, recognizing that the pandemic was difficult, we really have only received one specific offer to lease the property, and that's with Waterfront Shores, and therefore it's here. I would kind of say just to at the very beginning of this that it is rare that we would be discussing a lease in open session, specifically talking about a proposal to lease. And so I just kind of make sure that everybody's kind of aware of the fact
Chris,
that Waterfront Shores.
Chris, you're cutting out a bit. Is it just me? Is it just me in the buffering, Chris, or are you? Can you maybe take your video off? Is it just me?
I think it's just you. Yes.
Okay, then carry on. I'll try to make sense of it all.
No problem.
All
I'm trying to
right.
put my mic closer to.
I saw buffering on all this. I saw buffering on all the screens, so I figured it was just me. All right, good. Carry on. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, no problem. Last, Waterfront Shores is the developer who council has approved as the successful proponent on Pier 8, and they have long looked at the opportunity to utilize the site for the purposes that we have here. I think the first time that staff mentioned it is in a report from 2020, and the fact, as Councillor Farr had mentioned earlier on, there were different motions and iterations of the idea of having the developer be a part of the long-term solution here. We've come down here to this particular offer. Lastly, I will say that Appendix B and C are confidential, and clerks will certainly notify us that any discussion of the actual terms themselves in those two confidential would need to go into closed session. Kind of going forward, and we talked about this at length, and I think Councillor Powers, in your question to Andrea, this map probably would have been a little bit more, a little bit useful to specifically look at the zoning. This is a map that shows that zoning is a really key constraint for the site itself, and specifically for the building. You see that the building itself is one zone. Some of the areas around it, which is the areas that we were just discussing a moment ago, are a different zone. And then you've got the exception to it there as well. The other piece is that as the lands, as we just talked on the last, in the last discussion, the lands of the building itself are slightly expanded now to include both. There's a parking lot out in front, and then the side green space part that you see there. The limited zoning is really a hindrance to leasing the building out today. I know that some of you in the committee, staff, certainly many in the community and the media, always want to say, well, why don't you put this or that into it? And the reality is that it's just not possible. The zoning itself, as Andrea stipulated earlier on in the discussion, is very limited. Here's three that are very specific: long-term daycare facility, place of worship. Non-permitted uses are any commercial uses such as a restaurant, an outdoor commercial patio. So when people kind of ask us, why are we not putting a restaurant in there? Or secondarily, if we were to receive an inquiry about putting a restaurant in there, it does not meet the existing zoning. There are two exceptions to that, or they're not exceptions to the zoning, but they are elements within the broader city zoning bylaw that do allow things. The municipal uses, the events and programming, we talked about it in the last presentation. They do allow us to do temporary type programming. And the key is that they have some form of an inherent public interest. You can do special permits on an ad hoc kind of basis. Lastly, where this particular offer is that there is a part of the zoning bylaw that does allow temporary sales centers. And there's this section there. So that is one of the reasons why this is one of the very few outside of the very specific institutional uses. This is one of the few opportunities that does exist within the zoning for a lease for the property. Secondly, I think it's important to note, and the Appendix A kind of shows these maps. Sometimes we tend to think of the building as just one building and one open space. And what we as staff have tried to do here is show that the building has a variety of different spaces that people and groups have used, including city staff, over time. Yes, the circle around the section 6 is the largest area, which was the former restaurant and former kitchen area. That being said, though, there are other uses contained within it. What should be important to recognize is Parks Canada actually does have a lease in some aspects of the land, and it actually was us as the city providing that lease, and that space was a condition of the federal government transferring the property to the city. So they are there, and they are there functioning as it relates to today. There are other meeting rooms. There's a key meeting room. There's another area that's called on the maps a cyber cafe. I think way back in the day when it was the Marine Discovery Center, it was a little cafe that was in there. There's also the lobby when you first go in. There's the public washrooms on the far eastern portion of the building. There's a little space, the green that the Barrier Restoration Council used to utilize. I think Green Venture was in there at one point. There's a theater, a 50-seat theater that's just inside the entranceway. That's self-contained. And then there's several patios. There's actually 2 patios that go off both the meeting room and the cyber cafe, slightly to the east of the building. Then there's the main large patio that Councillor Farr recognized earlier on that was built as part of the restaurant renovation that you see in the picture here. And then there's a secondary patio to the west that comes just off the area 7, just off a little anteroom of a restaurant area there as well. So that the offer to lease from Waterfront Shores is specific only to the area that you see circled there, and it's relegated to the exclusive use areas of the former restaurant and the kitchen. This does allow, the report that staff have in front of you does allow for the other areas to be utilized for other uses. So when we kind of dive into what the offer to lease is really about, it is about the identifying an exclusive lease area that is just the restaurant and kitchen area, and that area is exclusive specifically to Waterfront Shores, meaning the public will not have access to that, other than obviously the Waterfront Shores looking for the public to kind of access and meet with them. But it's an area that's exclusive to them. The rest of the building, though, would be continued to be used for both non-exclusive uses as well as the common area uses. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for 1 second. Lastly, on the financial side of things, there is a new revenue stream that does come out of this. That is contained in the two confidential appendices as far as the terms, and this is a significant revenue stream that is brand new. Although we do receive some revenue on ad hoc bookings and certainly could continue to see ad hoc revenue, this is a revenue that would be related to a very specific aspect of a commercial lease. I think it's also important to note that one of the things that again, that we talked about and kind of comes off from the last discussion that we had is that both there's some operating costs that are inherent in the building as it relates today. There's some capital costs, but there's also the cost as for public animation. And in this past summer, we did do some animation, and this subcommittee actually put $40,000 towards that type of animation. This new revenue stream could be used to offset elements of that and to add animation going forward. Key rationale for our recommendation and why we've brought this forward to you today is, first and foremost, it's actually an offer from Waterfront Shores, and therefore it entails an action for council to make on this, whether that's to approve or not to approve. But I do want to make sure that we kind of go through kind of the key rationale. It is one of the very few aspects that kind of hits all the aspects of the council direction that you put forward back in April of 2021. It is consistent with that direction. It's consistent with the existing zoning regulations, although not specific as it relates to institutional, but it does fit the zoning regulations. It does allow for year-round occupancy and with a limited time frame, or on the 5-year time frame. It is for only a portion of the site, so it does allow us to be able to utilize the site for all the other types of uses that we would like to see happen. It continues to allow for indoor and outdoor animation. I would be remiss if I didn't kind of credit the fact that when Waterfront Shores does open up this sales center, and obviously they're looking to do that right away, that's the reason why this is before you today in a timely manner, they will drive some tremendous traffic to the site. I'm sure that there won't be a person who doesn't walk the trail today or come down there for the amenities in the park that's not going to at least want to go in and see what the developer is looking to propose for the rest of the site on Pier 8. So it's certainly in the short term, my thinking would be that it'll be a tremendous piece of the animation. But that doesn't kind of mean that community groups and their organizations, they can still rent out the other portions, and they'd certainly be complementary. Our real estate folks, both our chief real estate officer, Mr. Kessler, and Mr. McCullough, have reviewed the offer, and they do believe that it reflects market value for the lease itself, and that those financial resources can be redeployed for both public programming, and they could also be redeployed for other uses if you wish. Lastly, coming back to the recommendations themselves, and these two slides are just the recommendations. Recommendation A is namely for you to approve staff to negotiate the specifics of this lease itself with Waterfront Shores. B is that we actually look to negotiate a proportionate share of the non-exclusive use areas. Waterfront Shores has asked for, although not exclusive use of things like the meeting room and the theater and potential use for some of the patios. So this recommendation B allows us to have that use. a perfect example of this and the combination between exclusive and non-exclusive. I think Lister Block is kind of an intriguing kind of a project, another property that does show that there are areas such as that are exclusive, say the cafe or the restaurant, or even the area that tourism is in, or the other commercial properties there. But that lobby area, the walkway, would be one of those areas that could be seen as a common use or a non-exclusive area. The area that we've used for events in Lister Block could also be one of those areas that people could book, whether that was Waterfront Shores or not. So that is what B would be for us to go and negotiate a proportionate share for Waterfront Shores for those areas. And the remainder of the recommendations are standard real estate clauses that you would all be familiar with, as real estate typically brings leases forward in other venues. That'd be the end of my formal presentation, and happy to take questions.
Mayor Fred is on the list.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Chris. And generally, to support the direction that's being provided here, knowing full well that defining uses in this location is going to take some time. So I see that as a good interim opportunity to generate some revenue, benefit the development that's happening there, still allowing for significant public amenity space, especially that front of bay patio, that significant patio that was a major investment, as well as the theater and of course the common use areas and that little cafe space. All very important, I think, public amenities that need to be part of our opportunity to provide for others in our community. My one question would be, and I know that we've not defined the timeline in the document here, but my question would be a more of a general nature. What if between now and the ending of the timeline, we discover a use for the building that we would like to introduce that could happen sooner rather than later? I guess my question is, do we have an out? And I don't want to disadvantage the Waterfront Shores folks. I understand what they're trying to achieve here, which I think is noble and great. But we also have, a good exercise going on here that hopefully, in a reasonable period of time, we'll come up with a vision that we can put into practice. And so, how do you see the timelines kind of fitting? And if they don't necessarily fit, how do we at least preserve the right for the city to get sooner access to the building than the current term might allow?
Chris?
Through you, Mr. Chair, typically through real estate and city-owned properties, we do provide for a clause that's typical in many municipally owned buildings that we have that do allow for us to have an early termination with that, and we could certainly we'd look to put that into the lease as well, specifically if it's especially for a municipal use. That being said, I think it's fair to say that Waterfront Shores or any tenant, quite frankly, would look to as part of that would want it to be fair, meaning on timing. They likely wouldn't want to have to find a new home within weeks, as opposed to, there needs to be a realistic time frame. And then secondarily, as part of that, on the financial side of things, it would be some apportionment of leasehold interest. But we could certainly, that would be a typical clause that would go into the lease, and certainly take that as direction here to ensure that it is in the lease.
Okay, that's my only point. And I'm not doing this to disadvantage the Waterfront Shores. I fully appreciate and respect what they're going to be doing there, and I support it wholeheartedly. And again, I'm put my oar in the water at the appropriate time if I can still afford it, a unit in that location. But I don't want to disadvantage the city either. So that if between during the term of this agreement, we find an alternate use that we would like to introduce, I want the ability for us to be open to that and to be able to put that into effect, that we aren't locked out of that opportunity, for the duration of the term of this agreement. So that'd be my only request, that staff, do and it is kind of standard procedure. I mean, we've had these agreements in place in many of the facilities that we have, especially ones that we have, potential alternate uses down the road for. So this is essentially a temporary use by them. If they had to, I mean, many other developments have temporary trailers that they put up rather quickly, actually. I mean, they're relatively inexpensive. They put them up, within days, and, they can have another showroom or another location. So I just want to make sure that we can keep that door open. So if you can, I don't know if you want that to be direction, Mr. Chair, or you want to have that in formal motion form, but I would like to ensure that we build into this agreement an exit strategy for the city if we find another use prior to the end of the term of the agreement.
Well, we still have Councillor Powers with us, and to be privy to time, I think direction was fine. Chris noted, Mr. Mayor, it is fairly consistent, and perhaps if we want to see the details between now and ratification of this subcommittee, then we'll be able to see that, if that's okay. Direction is fine. Are you okay with that? Okay. Anybody else? It was a good point. Really good point. Move then the 8.2 peer animation program, Hamilton Waterfront Trust status update. That is moved by somebody did ask, actually, and it was a good question. What are we approving here? So I'll ask you, Madam Clerk, to reference the approval, please, or the page.
Certainly. So I'm confirming that you don't need to go into closed session to discuss the
Yes,
confidential.
I'm assuming.
Yes. Okay.
I should ask that question of committee. We don't need to go into closed. Okay, Councillor Wilson, I'm glad. Councillor Wilson, on that, do we want to go into closed?
Just had one quick question. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Sorry, that's fine. Tamara, hold off for a second.
Sure.
Councillor Wilson, please.
No, my apologies, Chair. A quick question on the in-camera stuff.
I do have Councillor Danko in the chat saying he'd like to go in camera as well.
Okay, your question on the in-camera stuff, and we do have a committee member who does want to go in close, so we'll do that anyway. But if you feel you want to ask it in open, you can. Go ahead, Councillor Wilson.
No, I'm sorry. I think clearing too much snow this morning has messed with my brain. I thought you were waiving the in-camera, and I just wanted to underscore that I did have a question. So
Yeah,
on the
okay.
in-camera item.
Or in camera. Okay.
Okay, for in camera. Okay, no, I was under the assumption we had it cleared up, but that's we'll go in closed at the appropriate time. I think Tamara, I would do that after the next item, correct?
That's correct. Yes. So for this item, if you can just receive the presentation, then we can move on to, and then we'll vote to defer the consideration of the report to after closed session.
Okay, sounds good. If committee will just wait one moment, please. I've lost Tamara's game sheet, and I don't want to mess up, so better take a second to call it back up. Here it is. And yeah, so to receive, moved by Mayor Fred, seconded by Councillor Danko. All in favor on receiving the presentation? Good. And we'll get back to it, obviously, as mentioned. So 10.1 is the West Harbour Redevelopment Plan Implementation Status Update. We're looking now.
Sorry, before we do that, so we've got a vote on the Mr. Chair. I need Mayor Eisenberger and Councillor Powers. Is he still with us?
No, he is not.
Gone. Okay, and Mr. Mayor, you are in favor of receiving the presentation?
I voted in e-scribe. I forgot that we
Yes.
have that.
Thumbs up for me. Again.
Okay, thank you. So that is carried 4-0. And now we are going to vote to move into to defer discussion.
Do we need to vote? Okay, move to defer the item until after the closed session. Moved by Councillor Danko, seconded by Mayor Fred Eisenberger. All in favor? Recorded vote. Sorry about that, Tamara.
No, that's no worries.
There's really no reason for me to rush at this point.
And Mayor Eisenberger is in favor of deferring until after closed session?
Yep, he has this.
Thank you. And that is unanimous, 4-0. Now you can move on to item 10.
Any discussion on 10.1? This is the discussion item. Seeing none, who would like to move to receive 10.1, which is the West Harbour Redevelopment Plan Implementation Status Update? Moved by Councillor Danko, seconded by Councillor Wilson. All in favor? Recorded vote. Okay, thank you.
And Mayor Eisenberger is in favor. Sorry, I can't see the screen. Yes.
No, he is. I apologize. I should have shared that with you.
All right, that is unanimous, 4-0. And now we are going to go into closed session.
Right, and committee B and C are confidential, and we have expressed a wish to discuss this in closed. And so we're going to then move to, where's the, move to go into closed. That is moved by, screen here, folks, moved by Mayor Fred, seconded by Councillor Wilson. All in favor, recorded vote. Is that fine, Tamara, that language?
Yes,
find your script.
I'm going to read the the motion that the West Harbour Development Subcommittee move into closed session to discuss item 14.1 pursuant to section 9.1 subsection C of the city's procedural bylaw 21-021 and section 239.2 subsection C of the Ontario Municipal Act as amended as the subject matter pertains to, bear with me for 1 second.
A proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board.
Excellent.
Sorry, it was small and I couldn't see. I expanded it. All in favor then?
And that was moved and seconded by Mayor Eisenberger and Councillor Wilson.
Seconded by Councillor yes, Wilson.
Wilson, yes.
And the mayor gives a thumbs up.
Thank you very much.
And so
that's
you
unanimous.
can offer whatever advice to anybody watching. Tamara?
Sure. Yes. So because of the way we are live streaming this, the YouTube live stream is going to end now, and we will set us up a second live stream that will be called Part 2 that will start up once we get out of closed session.
And then we'll wait up to 5 minutes upon reconvening an open session before proceeding with the meeting to provide members of the public and the media a chance to return. Reminder to all members of the committee to ensure that you move into closed on your eScribe. And before we move into closed, I'd like to ask all members of the public to please exit WebEx now. I think that's worth reiterating.
Okay.
That's the same applies to any staff not directly contributing.